Over
Thank
to
you,
Dr.
madam.
Ravraj.
Thank you, madam. First of all, I would like to thank the Department of Periodontics, Vishnu Dental College, for giving me this opportunity to be the moderator for this particular session. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Darpan Bhargav, who has completed his bachelor's and master's of dental surgery, both from Meenakshi Ammal Dental College, Chennai. He was a distinction holder and gold medalist from Dr. MGR University, Tamil Nadu during his undergraduation, and from Meenakshi Academy of Higher Education and Research during his post-graduation. He has successfully completed his diploma of membership in oral and maxillofacial surgery from Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, Glasgow. And also he holds a postgraduate diploma in hospital management and clinical research. He is credited with introduction of twin mix nerve blocks for mandibular anesthesia, and currently, as Madam mentioned, he is serving as an associate professor in People's Dental College, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India. He has over 80 national and international scientific publications to his credit and holds first ever Indian patent and copyrighted surgical technique for TMJ prosthesis. He has been awarded PhD from Meenakshi University, Chennai, for his acclaimed research on predictability and feasibility of total alloplastic TMJ reconstruction using Darshan TM joint prosthesis for patients in Indian subcontinent. With this brief introduction, may I now call upon Dr. Darpan Bhargav to continue with his lecture. Thank you. Dr. Darpan, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, fine.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi Raja, for that wonderful introduction. And I would like to thank Dr. Gautami, HOD Periodontics there, and the entire team of Periodhin who had invited me on this platform. I would also like to thank Dr. Kishore Muturi, who has put me across to all of you guys. So without wasting any time, we would start with masticatory muscles and deglutition, which is aimed at postgraduates who would hopefully get benefited from this. So I'm a clinical director here at TMJ Consultancy Services, and I am working with People's University here at Bhopal. Just to start the presentation, let us convey our tributes to Dr. Ackland, whose work and his wet labs in the Louisville University has inspired me, and most of the lecture here would be based on his work at the University of Louisville. So let's start with masticatory muscles. Now, when we talk about masticatory muscles, you have four pairs of masticatory muscles, namely the temporalis, the medial pterygoid, the lateral pterygoid, and the masseter muscle. Now, these four muscles basically aim at coordinating the movement of the lower jaw. The cardinal mandibular movements of the masticatory muscles are elevation, depression, protrusion, retraction, and side-to-side movements of the jaw. When we talk about the embryology of muscles of mastication, we should remember that all the muscles of mastication originate from the first pharyngeal arch, not too difficult to remember. And once these muscles initiate its development from first pharyngeal arch, the differentiation of muscles start at around 7th week in utero. The nerve supply to these muscles is initiated at the 8th week. Now, when we talk about the blood supply to these muscles of mastication, we should remember only maxillary artery, which is the branch of the external carotid artery, which is actually supplying all the muscles of mastication in total. When we talk about nerve supply or neural innervation to these muscles of mastication, it is all by mandibular nerve, the third division of the trigeminal nerve. The temporalis in particular is by deep temporal branches, Medial and lateral pterygoids are easy to remember. It is nerve to medial pterygoid and nerve to lateral pterygoid, and masseter by masseteric branches. Jumping on to the first muscle in question, the lateral pterygoid muscle. Now, the two muscles lie medial to the mandible. So we would need to remove a portion of the mandible to visualize them, the lateral pterygoid muscle and the medial pterygoid. Now, to start with, just to understand the anatomy of these muscles, let us remove the portion of the coronoid process and the zygomatic arch and identify the infratemporal fossa in this particular anatomical diagram when we observe from the lateral aspect of the skull. In this skull, to note the zygomatic arch and the portion of the coronoid is removed, and the portion which we visualize with this white arrow is the infratemporal region. With the soft tissues on, same picture, you don't have the zygomatic arch in place, you don't have the coronoid in place, and you observe the infratemporal region. Now, identify the lateral pterygoid plate at the posterior aspect of the maxilla marked with white arrow. And let's have the muscle in place. Now, this is the position or the location of the lateral pterygoid muscle at the medial aspect of the mandible, running from the posterior aspect of the maxilla towards the neck of the condyle. Now, when we talk about origin of the lateral pterygoid muscle, it has two distinct origins. One is at the greater wing of sphenoid here, and the second is at the lateral aspect of the lateral pterygoid plate. Now, just to orient, let's turn the entire specimen onto the medial side. Now, when we observe from the medial side, this is the lateral pterygoid plate. You see the origin of the lateral pterygoid muscle. This is the lateral pterygoid muscle, and this is the condyle of the mandible. Now, it gets inserted at this particular position at the neck of the condyle, otherwise referred to as pterygoid fovea. Now, when we observe from the medial aspect and we remove the parts of the medial aspect of the capsule, we would observe that this muscle in particular gives its insertion also to the capsule of the temporomandibular joint along with the neck of the condyle, and also to the disc, the intervening disc or the fibrous disc which is present in the temporomandibular joint. The fibers would be inserted at the neck of the condyle, the capsule of the temporomandibular joint, and the few fibers are also inserted at the disc or at the anteromedial aspect of the disc of the temporomandibular joint. Moving on to the medial pterygoid muscle. Now, medial pterygoid muscle is another muscle which lies in the medial aspect of the ramus of the mandible. Now, identify the muscle here. When we talk about the origin of this muscle, it is from the, now we are having a medial view of the skull from the medial aspect. Identify the red painted area as the medial aspect of the lateral pterygoid plate. Now, when we see this, observe the medial aspect of the medial pterygoid plate. So the insertion is at this aspect of the lateral and medial pterygoid plates, and also from the tuberosity of the maxilla. So this is the origin of the medial pterygoid muscle. Now, when we talk about the insertion of the medial pterygoid muscle, when we see the medial aspect of the ramus of the mandible is the cut specimen of the mandible, you would see the insertion of the medial pterygoid muscle at this portion of the angle and medial aspect of the ramus of the mandible. Now let's move on to the temporalis, the third muscle in question. Now, when we talk about temporalis, temporalis can be understood when we have the coronoid in place. We still don't have the zygomatic arch, which is cut in this specimen. Now, this is a large fan-shaped muscle, one of the largest, or in fact, the largest muscles of mastication on the lateral aspect of the skull and the ramus of the mandible. Now, when we talk about the origin of the temporalis muscle in particular, you would see that it has a large origin confined by the temporal lines on the lateral aspect of the skull, and it converges anteriorly to the coronoid process of the mandible and gets attached there. So when we talk about the insertion of temporalis muscle, it would be on this portion of the coronoid process on the lateral aspect of the mandible, and this portion of the coronoid on the medial aspect, which descends down to the anterior surface of the ramus of the mandible. Now, when we observe closely, you would see that once the zygomatic arch is in place and we have the bird's eye view, you would see that the temporalis muscle converges and goes below and lies medial to the zygomatic arch to get inserted into the coronoid and the anterior ramus. The entire muscle is covered by a dense fascia, the deep temporal fascia, which we identify in some of our surgical procedures, and lies below the fascia. Going on to the last, fourth one, the masseter muscle. Now, identify the location of the masseter muscle on the lateral aspect of the ramus of the mandible. You would see that this is a nice, thick, bulky muscle and is quite a powerful muscle which controls the jaw functions. Now, when we talk about origin of the masseter muscle, it originates from the anterior two-thirds of the lateral aspect of the zygomatic arch and the zygomatic body. Anterior two-thirds would give insertion to this muscle on the lateral aspect, and the entire length of the arch would give attachment to this muscle from the medial aspect. You would observe that you have some superficial fibers of this muscle and some of the deep fibers of this muscle. The superficial fibers run in the posterior direction, whereas the deep fibers are more vertical in this particular muscle. Now, when we talk about insertion of the masseter, the insertion of the masseter is on this lateral aspect of the ramus and angle of the mandible. Now, if we observe this masseter on the lateral aspect of the ramus of the mandible and the medial pterygoid on the medial aspect of the ramus of the mandible, both of them converge at the angle to form a pterygomasseteric sling. Considering this is the medial aspect of the specimen, lateral aspect of the specimen, and we are looking from down up. Now, when we talk about the function of this muscle and the effect of the muscle which produce movement in the jaw, we should remember that temporalis functions to move the jaw back and up, lateral pterygoid front and down, medial pterygoid front and up, and masseter up and front. So elevation, retraction, protrusion, depression, and side-to-side movements which affect the jaw function is by the combination of the action of lateral and medial pterygoid muscles both. Apart from the primary muscles of mastication, there are some accessory muscles for mastication. These accessory muscles work in coordination with primary muscles to produce mandibular movement. Accessory muscles of mastication include the buccinator, the suprahyoid muscles, including the digastric, mylohyoid, and the geniohyoid, and the infrahyoid muscles, the sternohyoid, sternothyroid, thyrohyoid, and omohyoid muscles. Moving on to deglutition, the second part of the lecture. Deglutition, or simply swallowing, is a complex process involving motor control with sensory feedback from many anatomic structures within the oral cavity, pharynx, larynx, and the esophagus. A normal swallowing or the process of deglutition comprises of two major components. One is the bolus transport from the mouth to the stomach, and second is the airway protection. Now, deglutition, to understand, we may divide it into four phases: the oral preparatory phase, oral swallowing phase, pharyngeal phase, and esophageal phase. We may combine oral preparatory phase and oral swallowing phase as buccal phase 2. So when we talk about deglutition, the three phases: buccal phase, oropharyngeal phase, or generally the pharyngeal phase, and the esopharyngeal phase. We should remember that the buccal phase in general is voluntary, and pharyngeal and esophageal stage are involuntary phases. Now, just going through a short demonstration of deglutition, and to understand the process, you should understand that deglutition is a process of taking the food from the mouth and transporting it till the stomach. It is strictly under neural or neuroregulation, which is a complex procedure which we would understand in a while. Now, when we start taking food through the mouth, the first stage is mastication, or chewing the food, which is acted upon by lingual lipase and salivary amylase from the salivary glands. Mixing of food with these enzymes would convert the food into a state called bolus. Once the bolus is formed in the oral cavity, the first stage starts when the buccal phase, the anterior musculature of the tongue and the posterior musculature of the tongue gets lifted up to get the bolus at the center of the tongue against the palate, and the posterior muscles depress down and pushes the bolus downwards towards the oropharynx. Now, once this happens, this bolus triggers the receptors at the oropharyngeal level, which ultimately triggers the medulla oblongata and lower part of the pons, which pushes the uvula upwards to prevent the nasopharynx from the bolus, and pushes the epiglottis down to prevent the airway from the bolus. Now there is a relaxation of the upper esophageal sphincter, and the bolus is pushed in the esophagus and enters the esophageal stage. Now in the esophageal stage, you have series of peristaltic movement in the smooth muscles, which pushes the bolus down towards the stomach, and ultimately there is a relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter, which gets the bolus in the stomach. Now we should remember these phases and understand the mechanisms of it. Now, to understand the neuroregulation of deglutition is a complex process with a lot of anatomical structures and the nerves involved. But to summarize, the structures involved in the process of deglutition include the tongue, the hard and the soft palate, the pharyngeal muscles, the esophagus, and the gastroesophageal junction. Now, to coordinate this entire process, you have the nerves which are involved, which are trigeminal, facial, glossopharyngeal, vagus, and hypoglossal, along with their nuclei. So these are the important structures we should keep in mind. Any questions further may be directed to the email or the number here. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for patient listening. Over to Dr. Raj.
Yes, Dr. Darpan, that was a wonderful presentation with a videographic demonstration of all the muscles of mastication and deglutition. And from the audience, nothing much. There are two questions that were posted, in which one of the participant asked to explain the medial pterygoid muscle again. That you can skip off. There is no need, like it remains the same, the origin and insertion. And the other question is, can you please emphasize on the periodontal considerations of muscles of mastication? Only these two questions are appearing in the question and answer session right now. Have you got anything to say on that, like periodontal consideration?
Yeah. When we talk about periodontal considerations, Now, one important thing which is coming up in literature and is quite recent, rest are a lot of old things already available for us to read, but the new things are EMG studies or electromyographic studies in the patients with trauma from occlusion. Now, in the new concepts on trauma from occlusion, apart from the aberrant occlusal forces, it is noted that if you do EMG studies or electromyographic studies of the muscles of mastication, you would observe the aberrant forces in the muscle, the difference or aberrant tonicities of these muscles affecting the forces which are transmitted to the occlusion, resulting in trauma from occlusion. So that is the recent concept which I just came across. Apart from that, anything else can be directed to my email ID. I would reply.
Yeah. Shall I ask you a few things so that the audience can be benefited
Sure,
from?
definitely.
Yeah. In your presentation, you are mentioning about this pterygometric sling.
Exactly, sir.
Yeah, most of the maxillofacial postgraduates are the surgeons who come across. Where and all what is the significance or what is the importance of this pterygometric sling to?
Now, this pterygometric sling in particular forms a sling or a swing-like structure with two strong muscles at either end, one at the lateral and the medial aspect. Now, this sling in particular, when you close the mouth, acts as a hinge to close it in a proper way and a coordinated way. Apart from that, once you observe this particular area where the pterygometric sling is attached, in cases with temporomandibular joint ankylosis, you would observe a deep antigonial notch in this particular region, which is there. It is mostly related to functional matrix theory, where anterior and posterior aspects of the bone grow, where the rest of the bone does not grow in a proper order. But this is the region which is affected in that particular disease.
Okay. So being a maxillofacial surgeon, one should be aware of this particular structure when we are doing any angle fractures and BSSO. Is there any surgical importance of in that particular area when you're doing bilateral sagittal split osteotomy, invariably for orthognathic surgery purpose? Yeah.
Now, the pterygometric one is that all these.
I'm just asking applied anatomy so that they can answer
right.
better in the question paper.
Right, right, sir. Now, one, we should understand that these muscles, with their attachments to the bone, are also a supply for the nutrition and kind of blood supply to the portions of the bone. Now, in particular, when sir mentioned about BSSO, and we do a sagittal split osteotomy. Now, we should understand that one segment of the split would house the vasculature, and the other aspect of the bone other aspect of the split would not house the vasculature. The non-vascularized segment of the mandible during the sagittal split osteotomies are strictly supplied by these muscles and its attachments to the bone and keeps the bone viable. Number one.
So
second,
you should not disrupt it more. Yeah.
You should not strip it unnecessarily or overtly, and strip it only as and minimally where required. Now, second is pterygometric sling has got a very strong attachment with its Sharpie's fibers on to the bone directly with the muscle. So wherever you want to mobilize the bone, you need to dissect these fibers or remove it further away from the bone. Otherwise, they would be the cause of relapse. So this is the second aspect. Third, when we talk about mandibular fractures in particular, this is the wonderful avascular area which you would find to dissect and separate the muscles from the lateral aspect of the ramus of the mandible. Just anterior to, when we go to the applied anatomy, just anterior to the pterygometric sling at the anterior attachment of the masseter, you would encounter facial artery. Yeah. So that is another important aspect which we should think about.
There is one more question just now posted. Can you explain the disorders of muscles of mastication and their management? Any particular disorders of muscles of mastication?
Now, when we talk about disorders of muscles of mastication, you would want to subclassify them into different categories. One is the muscle disorders per se. Second is the disorders due to the neural innervation to the specific muscles there. So when you talk about now generalized condition, for example, we talk about myasthenia gravis.
Yeah.
That is the condition
Generalized.
generalized. Now, when we talk about, definitely the muscles of mastication would also be affected by this particular problem. Now, if we talk about surgery and the importance of a disease and muscles of mastication, we talk about tetany. This is a very important muscle group, a small muscle group, where a surgeon may get confused initially with trismus and should differentiate with botulinum toxins. So that is another aspect. So when you are studying disorders of the muscles of mastication, classify them as neural disorders and muscular disorders, and then maybe study them would be a easier option.
Yes, Dr. Darpan. Pediatric considerations like swallowing or muscles of pediatric considerations of swallowing. Anything on that? Can you explain any differentiation is there between an infantile swallow and a toddler swallow?
There is a distinction specifically. Now, when we talk about pediatric population, they are more towards suckling than a swallow. So even at the oral stage or the buccal stage, the mechanisms differ in terms of uh, taking the food in the mouth and getting it to the oropharynx. So as we grow, the muscles of the tongue get adapted for the anterior and posterior elevation. Whereas in a pediatric population, when you start to understand deglutition, it is the posterior aspect of the tongue which locks and creates a suction in the oral cavity with the anterior height of the muscle being lower. So that's where it starts in the oral cavity. And then when it progresses, now you don't have a bolus as such, but it is a meshed food or a liquid food which is there in the oral cavity. So now the child has to get an anterior seal and the posterior lowering of the posterior height of the muscles of the tongue with the seal of the oropharynx, which is then pushed into the oropharyngeal region and then pushed down.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Darpan. And any correlation between this muscles of mastication and MPDS? How to ascertain that it is an MPDS, myofascial pain dysfunction syndrome, regarding palpation of these muscles or any any trigger zones in MPDS regarding muscles of mastication?
When we talk about myofascial pain dysfunction syndrome, one is closely related to temporomandibular joint disorders, and usually we study it with temporomandibular joint disorders. But we should understand that in MPDS or myofascial pain dysfunction syndrome, there is no organic pathology in the stromatognathing system as such, and the temporomandibular joint is usually in normal architecture and is not in a state of pathology. Number one. Second, when we talk about MPDS, it is the pain originating from the muscles which control the jaw movement, and we should identify the trigger zones. Maybe your use of local anesthetic at that particular portion would be a good option to identify the trigger zone in that particular region where the patient complains or tells about the initiation of pain from. So there is drastic change in management of myofascial pain dysfunction syndrome as such from previous days to now. It was confused with temporomandibular joints as such.
Okay. When in the internal derangement, when the disc attachments, I know your favorite topic is TMJ, but not much questions got posted here regarding means like prosthodontic considerations, orthodontic considerations, like that. The broad way of answering is difficult. Like one can imply to their respective entities regarding the muscles of mastication and their action and their correlation between the various clinical scenarios like orthodontic and prosthodontic considerations of muscles of mastications. And if it is a case of internal derangement of TMJ, more than muscles of mastication, the retrodiscal tissue, the bilaminar zone, what we usually call, is there any relationship between this attachment of lateral pterygoid and the retrodiscal tissue and bilaminar zone? Can you emphasize and make the audience understand on that particular aspect?
So in particular, when we talk about the lateral pterygoid and its attachment to the disc and the retrodiscal tissue. Now we should understand, as we emphasized in one of the slides in this presentation also, that the lateral pterygoid is one muscle which gives its attachment to the mandible and also the disc.
Yes,
so the
yeah.
same muscle is given two functions to perform. When we have the opening of the mouth and the temporomandibular joint is put to function, you have two type of movements which happen there. One is pure rotation and one is translation, or the anterior movement of the temporomandibular joint. Now, then there is pure rotation, and this disc in particular is a structure which gives a cushioning effect between the two surfaces of the bone to prevent the ultimate any adverse effects of bony to bony contact. So this disc has to cover the head of the condyle when it moves or changes its position all the time. Once you have the jaw which is put to function and the mouth is opening, initially you have pure rotation for first 15 degrees of the mouth opening, interincisal 15 millimeters of interincisal opening. You have pure rotation. There, the disc lies in between the head of the condyle and the temporal bone. But when the mouth is opened beyond that particular point, you would observe that the condyle moves anteriorly, or the condyle translates. Once the condyle translates anteriorly, it should be understood that the disc also should move along with the head of the condyle to maintain its position in between the head of the condyle and the temporal bone to protect the bony surfaces. Now, this is the function of lateral pterygoid muscles. When the lateral pterygoid pulls the condylar neck anteriorly to give adequate mouth opening, few fibers which are attached to the disc also pulls the disc in the forward direction to maintain its position between the temporal bone and the head of the condyle. When the mouth closes, the head of the condyle should move back to its original position, and also the disc should go back to its original position along with the head of the condyle. So this is the very intricate movement which happens at that particular portion. Now we should understand that the disc is a avascular structure, and any problems with the disc or this well-coordinated movement will have its effect in the retrodiscal space, and retrodiscal space and the synovium are the well-innervated structures. Any pain or discomfort which you would have eventually because of the discoordination of all these movements, which eventually happens in patients with internal derangement, would be because of the retrodiscal area and the synovial lining.
One question getting frequently posted is prosthodontic considerations. So I thought I won't ask you on that, but they have been continuously asking prosthodontic considerations, please.
Prosthodontic I would not be actually a very right person to comment on that, because Dr. Ravi Raja would understand that we understand knife and to cut well than to understand prosthodontics. But yes, I would, because we work in the field of temporomandibular joint, and the occlusal forces as such are a very important factor which were correlated to the joint diseases as such. But with the recent literature, which we come across now, it clearly indicates that occlusal problems may be a trigger to temporomandibular joint diseases as such, but temporomandibular joint diseases per se should be treated separately, and occlusal problems should be treated separately. You don't correlate both of them. If you have a established temporomandibular joint problem or a pathosis happening in the temporomandibular joint, and you have occlusal discrepancies, it may have been a trigger one time at a long time back, but now the patient has got established temporomandibular joint disease. So address both of them separately. This is what I would like to emphasize at this moment. Second, now there is upcoming studies on T-scans, assessment of occlusal forces and its correlation with mandibular function and the joint dysfunction, all three. So there have been studies which say that when you have initial, maybe Dr. Raja would understand Wilkie's two patients in particular. Wilkie's two patients, we have a classification where we grade temporomandibular joint disorders. Wilkie's two patients, those are the patient group where if a T-scan is recommended, would benefit us with some positive information which we can use it in the treatment plan as such. So occlusion does play a important role. Most of the patients, once we see with overclosure of the mouth, with missing posteriors, for example, they will eventually develop temporomandibular joint problems in the long run, because the muscle forces would guide the jaw to overclose without having a posterior stop. So these are the frequent patients which we encounter.
Thank you, Dr. Darpan. And one last final question: myositis ossificans. If it happens in the muscles of mastication, or possibility, and its sequelae, how to do that? Yeah.
Now, myositis ossificans is one disease which Dr. Raja would agree with me that it has got a very difficult phase of diagnosis. We have very small muscles, and if few fibers or a portion of the muscle ossifies, to pick that particular portion and give a diagnosis of myositis ossificans would take us to a toll. It is a great task, with best of imaging which we have available, which we have with us today. Now, once the diagnosis of myositis ossificans is established, it would be one. The important aspect of myositis ossificans is long run prevention, because the patient is prone to that particular disease, and you would have the fibers of the muscle which would eventually ossify. So that is one important aspect of this disease, prevention further. And second is removal of the existing disease. So the removal of existing disease takes us through the surgical phase of the treatment. There is no medical treatment to that disease as such. Myotomies, by identifying those portions, would be required in these patients.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Darpan. No more questions, and very much pleased to talk to you and coordinate this session with you. Thank you. Yeah. Ma'am, anything from VDC side? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Darpan. It was really a wonderful presentation, and you managed to finish off your presentation 10 minutes. And so I think all our dear students had the opportunity to listen to all the questions that have been posted in the group live. The earlier sessions, because of we were running of time, and so we had to post to them in their mails, and only few questions were answered. But Dr. Darpan has maintained his time very well, and the question and answer session is also on time. Thank you so much, Dr. Darpan.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gautami. Thank you, Dr. Raviraj. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And thank you so much, Raviraj sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
For making your time in spite of your busy schedule and moderating the session so well and patiently trying to complete all the sessions that were posted by our attendees. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.